well, the term visitation. Got it out of the book because children don't go visit a parent.
Right.
They are co-parented. We know it. We've known that, and counselors have preached that for decades. Well, why do we still have that language in our statutes? So things like that need to be cleaned up. But also, we could add a little more, pressure, probably into things like parenting agreements and frequency of contact.
The visitation language, I'm afraid, still exists under the Missouri statutes as well, although a lot of people try to call it temporary custody, temporary periods of custody, rather than visitation, but it's still there.
Parenting time is what I've seen in the more progressive state legislations, statutes that have been passed, and they just talk about parenting time for either parent.
Do you have any idea as to the generalization of these problems throughout the United States?
Well, it is widespread. You look at the statistics, and I don't have them right here in front of me, but you look at if you do dig those up on single parent-headed households and the percentage of kids in America that are being raised in which their primary household does not include their biological father, and also some other measures such as the number of months since they have even seen their biological father in the case of at-risk kids, for instance, which are a subset of those populations. Those statistics look like they've sort of ceilinged out, but at a rather poor level from the standpoint of the children's needs for a number of years. They sort of shot up and then ceilinged out. And it's true across. I'm a little surprised when I look at the statistics, and I have a statistics background, at how common these statistics are across the United States, and also common within Illinois. In fact, I heard a judge comment on this just in the last few weeks and said, some people think that fatherless households is the domain of low-income groups, and he said, actually, if you look at it, you'll find that the medium and high-income areas in a metropolitan area look very much like the low-income areas when you start looking at father involvement.
Wow.
Another thing that sort of jumps out when you look at the statistics is that Illinois, depending on what statistics you look at for father involvement or father presence in the household, is near the bottom. There's only 5 states, depending on what statistic you're looking at, but if you look at the ones that are commonly used, there's only 5 states in the country worse off than Illinois in terms of lack of father presence in the household.
Wow.
So and a couple of those states are very low income, deep south states. So
Illinois really needs some help.
We are very much behind, and there has been a certain amount of, from what we can tell as non-custodial parents, advocates, a certain amount of resistance here to implementing some progressive programs and revising our statutes and all these things that need to be done to bring Illinois into this century.
Would it be fair to say that most people still have some of the old stereotypes, whereas the father's the breadwinner, the mother's the primary caregiver of the kids, and that's why they tend to get the custody?
Very much so, of course, and that's not, our judges do really try to do, if someone's willing to contest it, they try to do a fair and reasonable job of determining, well, who is the most involved. And we don't have an easy, cookie-cutter solution to these custody disputes. That's really not our focus. Our focus is on the inclusion of both children after that divorce, and that can be enhanced regardless of the custodial status. We're not saying that custodial status doesn't matter. We're saying that even if that continues, you still have all kinds of ways in which public programs can keep both parents involved in that child's life and enhance that role of both parents. And there's things that can be done in terms of the judicial proceedings, judicial practices that could do that.
Can you give us some examples of ways that both parents can be involved?
I would say right offhand, the top one would be simply both the quality of time that, as in terms of, for instance, as I've already mentioned, school overnights for non-custodial parents. That's there's resistance to that. We understand there's resistance to that, but actually, we can line up dozens of parents in any community that are already doing that, and it works fine for the kids. and they enjoy having both their parents fulfill that kind of special role you get when you make sure that the kids' homework is done and you make sure your children have taken a bath for the night and they've said their prayers and you've tucked them in and you've woken them up in the morning, you fix them a breakfast, and you've taken them to school. It's really not necessary, or as necessary as it has been rendered in the court proceedings, to only allow one parent to have the legal right to be able to do that. And I notice these are not uncontentious issues. There are those who would argue that, well, if the parents don't communicate well, then it's not good for the child. Well, we would show you some things that would maybe convince you otherwise, that even though at the time during divorce they might not be communicating well, when they're given the incentive to communicate, they do. I liken that to people dealing with their in-laws. They learn to communicate with them because their children are involved.
Right.
And so we learn to communicate with all kinds of people that we'd rather not, but we have to be given an incentive, don't we?
Yeah.
We have to, so we believe that a lot of people will do, and we have the evidence that people will respond to incentives to communicate well with each other, and that some of this inclusion can take place. I was talking to a father just yesterday, and he said, with text messaging, emailing back and forth, there is so much more communication now that doesn't have to take place face-to-face with cell phones. He said, he was telling me, he said, no, I don't have a close, warm, and fuzzy relationship with my ex, but we don't have any problem leaving each other last-minute and up-to-date messages over what needs to be done in terms of our child. And his child spends about 50-50 time between the two households. And it works.
And for parents, I think, who argue a lot, maybe email is a great form of communication, because then you are not necessarily saying what's in your head in the heat of the moment.
Right.
But you're saying what needs to be said.
Right. And the voice and voicemail on cell phones. Being able to leave a message, you got time to cool off, think about, call the person back. It does make for a more civil,
rational,
rational exchange of information about so-and-so's got to be picked up at the soccer game at this time. Can you do that? That kind of thing. Yeah, and the email helps too.
Right. And just to go back to the school time, having a non-custodial parent have time on a school night, I would think that would be good for the custodial parent as well, simply because they're no longer the only parent who is doing the serious stuff for the kid. They're no longer the one who's saying you have to do this and you have to do this. With the non-custodial parent, sort of as the fun parent, this is the weekend, we're going to the zoo. It's both parents, or the serious parents as well as the fun parents.
Absolutely, and that's really important, and you've hit on something there, and there's research to support that. I'll talk about it in a second, but and our research director, Robert Farrar, has really dug into this more than I have, but there's strong evidence to suggest that when either gender, moms or dads, are squeezed into a corner where they're only they only have the right to be with their child on legal protected parenting time on every other weekend and 4 hours on Wednesdays, they all start acting like Disneyland dads in a way. Because they're deprived of any other kind of parenting role. It's all weekends and just a little bit of time in midweek, which sometimes the children don't even have homework on the midweeks. You're right on target here that it's very good for both parents, mom and dad, and the kids, for the other parent to step into that role and share some of that burden, you might say, or that more heavy-duty parenting time where you got to stick to a schedule and you've got to get certain things done at a certain point in time. Right.
Now let me ask you this. In Missouri, and I don't know about Illinois, but in Missouri, a judge is supposed to do what is in the best interest of the child. That's the custody schedule that they are supposed to award.
That's the standard.
Okay.
Yes. And whatever they feel is in the best interest of the child, which some people have pointed out, national leaders, has been termed an abyss, because there's no definition of, well, what is that?
Right, true. What is in the best interest of the child. But how do we balance, if we have statutes that say, certain, or that, more heavily weigh towards a more balanced custody schedule, how do we balance whether they're making the decision that's in the best interest of the child, or if they're simply following a rigid statute?
Well, I